Good morning, students and faculty of Axe Academy of Higher Education. I wish to thank Dr. Rajesh for giving me this opportunity to speak on causes and symptoms of religious discord. On Friday, we will deal with the solutions. So we give you 2 days to stew in the problems, and then we'll get to the solutions. Hopefully. Okay. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi famously said, "An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind." John Steinbeck, the author, wrote, "All war is a symptom of man's failure as a thinking animal." In these days of increased polarization and violence between religions, it is important for us to be able to determine what the contributing factors might be and the evidence we may have for these factors. After all, if we hope to reach a point where discord and violence are things of the past, and I hope we are, we will need to deal with healing the memories of the past, these memories that keep us trapped in unwholesome ways of thinking. Of course, we are here at Axe Academy, which is a Christian institution. Hence, whatever we say about conflict and any proposed solutions should honor Jesus. In addition, whenever possible, we should try to understand everything in light of the scriptures, and hence I have divided this talk into 4 parts. First, we will attempt to understand the human condition from 3 scriptural lenses. Second, we will attempt to understand what the consequences from these 3 lenses means in terms of the divine judgments they represent. Third, we will look at the sources of conflict, and fourth, we will consider some of the symptoms of conflict. So the first 2 sections are groundwork, and then we will deal with the sources and symptoms. The human story in the Bible begins with 2 accounts of creation in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. In Genesis 3, we are introduced to a significant problem resulting from the disobedience of humans. God had a single command to the humans: "You may eat freely of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die." If it is true that God is a God of order rather than of chaos, this command must make sense. Unfortunately, it is often just taken to be a case in which God sets down some law and just to see if humans will obey it or not. However, this would mean that a single command that's issued to the humans was just some arbitrary command. In other words, God could have issued any other command. He could have said to them, for example, "Don't eat figs on Wednesday," and see whether they live up to that. So every other day they could live, but on Wednesday, no figs. He could have said that. Or on Thursdays, you must only face north. It's a command, right? Or you can drink from the Gihon and Pishon on alternate days. I mean, if it's just about a command, any command would do, right? But this would make God out to be doing things that are just random rather than with a purpose. And I hope we think God does things with a purpose. Hence, it's not enough for us to simply state that the prohibition from eating this particular fruit had no other reason than that God just felt like, let's tell them not to eat this fruit. We must therefore delve into the text of the Bible, but not just this text. We must ask ourselves, what kind of a relationship does God intend to have with his creatures, as indicated from the whole of the Bible? And here we see that Jesus makes it very clear that God's intention is to share meals with his people. Jesus is eating all the time. All the time he's going into people's houses eating, or whenever he's out, they don't have food, he's feeding them. I mean, eating is a big part of Jesus' ministry. Hence, in the letter to the church in Laodicea in Revelation, Jesus says, "I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and eat with you, and you with me." That is a promise he's giving, to eat with them. Every Christian church, in fact, celebrates and observes an ordinance or sacrament that we call the Last Supper or Eucharist or Communion, in which we remember a meal that Jesus shared with his disciples. We have to understand that sharing meals is one of the most important ways, one of the most meaningful ways that we can tell someone we are one family. Hence, for God to intend to share meals with us is an expression of his desire to include us in his family. But if we see this as a goal, showing up in the New Testament especially, and then in the promises in Revelation, should we not expect this to show up at the start also? But think of this. I have a very good friend who is allergic to milk products. When we go out to eat, she does not order anything that has milk products in them because she will have an allergic reaction. I, on the other hand, not being allergic, go ahead and order dishes with cheese and cream and all. I have no problems, right? No problem. What I'm eating can be quite dangerous and potentially life-threatening to her. And if I were like some of my relatives, many of my relatives are allergic to peanuts, she could order something with peanuts in it, and then it would be life-threatening for me. In other words, we can easily think of a situation where two people share a meal without them actually sharing the same food. It is the sharing around the table that is important. If then it was God's desire to share meals with his human creatures, could these two trees represent the kinds of food that each could consume? God could eat from both trees because nothing can harm him, but the humans could eat only from this one tree of life without damage to themselves. Somehow eating from this other tree would result in irreparable damage to the humans. In that case, the commandment is like a health warning to the humans rather than a test of obedience in itself. When the humans disobey now and eat this forbidden fruit, which they know is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they conclude that consuming the fruit automatically gives them the nourishment promised by the fruit. The fruit could indeed give the knowledge of good and evil, but only to someone who could digest the fruit. To a person who could not digest the contents, it would do just the opposite. Just like if my friend ate cheese, she would get bloated and feel full, but none of the nutrients are getting absorbed. In other words, after eating this fruit, the humans believe that they have wisdom, when in fact they had only become foolish because they can't assimilate what the fruit is promising. The result then of this disobedience is that humans are under the grave deception that they are wise. Isn't that why we call ourselves Homo sapiens? That is what does it mean? The wise human. We have nicely named ourselves that also, to show how proud we are of our wisdom, right? Right, yeah. Though possessing no wisdom, we have convinced ourselves that we are the wisest creature to ever have lived on this earth. The second scriptural lens on conflict is in Genesis chapter 6. There in verse 5 we read, "The Lord saw the wickedness of humans was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually." If we were wondering what specifically was the evil, this text does not leave us uninformed. In verse 11 we read, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence." Indeed, the opening verses declare, "When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all they chose." Now, the precursor to this is in Genesis chapter 4, actually, where we read of Cain's descendant Lamech, who kills a boy for causing a minor injury, and then boasts about it to his two wives. That's the first recorded instance of polygamy, which then inevitably leads to the exploitation of and violence against women. The opening verses of Genesis chapter 6, along with this account of Lamech, tell us that the kinds of violence that was particularly troubling to God. In the case of Lamech, it's a use of overwhelming power to kill a weaker person in the context of the exploitation of women. Ironically, or maybe not, instructively, the same sort of violence surrounding the sons of God is described in the opening verses of Genesis chapter 6. In case you are unconvinced that this is the main problem identified in the passage, we can see some parallels between Genesis 3 and Genesis 6. In Genesis 3 verse 6 we read, "When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate." The same pattern is repeated in Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, where we read, "The sons of God saw that they were fair," they meaning the daughters of men. The sons of God saw they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all they chose. In both cases, we see a seeing of some object, the seeing of the fruit in Genesis 3, and then the seeing of the daughters of men by the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. This is followed by a recognition that the object is good. In both cases, actually, the humans involved see that the object is tov. That's the Hebrew word, the tov. Tov is normally translated good. In Genesis chapter 6, because it's referring to the daughters of men, it's often translated as fair or beautiful. But the word is tov. And what that does is when you translate it as fair as beautiful, it obscures what the text is saying. Because the text is saying they saw that the women were good. Tov. This is followed by the taking of the object, the fruit or the women. We see a same pattern in 2 Samuel chapter 11, the incident where David violates Bathsheba. There we see the same three words in action. David sees her, finds that she is beautiful, again the word is tov, and takes her for himself. The same verbs are used. This pattern, to see something, evaluate it as good, and then take it for yourself, is very common in the Old Testament in contexts where humans sin. Hence, its presence here in Genesis chapter 3 and 6 should indicate what God actually finds objectionable. In Genesis 3, it is the humans taking and eating the forbidden fruit. In Genesis 6, it's the sons of God taking the daughters of men. This is not the place where we can go into depth into Genesis chapter 6. There's a lot of material there. So if you wish, you can hold your questions till the Q&A time. But what we learn from Genesis chapter 6 is the principle that might makes right, where those in power, the sons of God, prey on those who are weak, the daughters of men, and ruthlessly violate them. That's found to be intolerable, leading to judgment. When later in chapter 10 we are introduced to Nimrod, who is celebrated for his violence, we should understand that despite the devastation of the flood, which was unleashed against the human inclination to violence, humans did not learn. They continued to celebrate precisely the kind of people whose practices God had found objectionable enough to justify judging the world with the flood. The human inclination for violence continues until we get to Genesis chapter 11. There we read, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words." Do you not find this strange? I mean, many of us use the same language. I'm speaking in English. Hopefully you're able to understand me. But if Dr. Rajesh had asked someone else to present this talk, hopefully you would have heard a different perspective. And not the same words. Right? However, Genesis 11 tells us the people not only spoke the same language, they also spoke the same words. But when do you find different people saying exactly the same things? If I ask you something about some issue, and you say something, and then the next person also says exactly the same thing, what's behind that? That is possible only when there is indoctrination. When there is a fascist and totalitarian regime, one that does not allow any differing views, only the official propaganda is permitted to be expressed. That's when you get people saying the same words. This is a situation in which a so-called unity is achieved through the enforcement of uniformity. Hence we read that rather than spreading over the earth, as God had told them to do, fill the earth and multiply, etc., they gathered in one place in an attempt at severe centralization. In addition, there was only one language, in other words, one mode of communication. Only that is allowed. And finally, one word points to extreme indoctrination and propaganda that is required for any fascist and totalitarian regime to survive. So what we have learned from these three scriptural lenses is that after eating the forbidden fruit, humans began to believe that they possess what the fruit provides, that is wisdom. But because we can't digest its nutrients, we only have a false sense of possessing wisdom. We don't actually have it. This illusion of wisdom leads us down to a path where we celebrate violence and institutionalize it. And then the end result is a fascist and totalitarian society in which no dissenting voices are permitted. So this gets us now to the divine responses in each of the three cases we saw, Genesis 3, 6, and 11. In Genesis 3, we read, "Then Yahweh God said, 'See, the humans have become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now they might reach out their hands and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever.' Therefore the Lord God sent them forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which they were taken." Here I interpret that first part where God says that the humans know good and evil as a sarcastic statement to contrast what humans think with what what is actually the case. Given that the humans had caused themselves irreversible damage by eating something they could not digest, causing them to be placed under an illusion that they had actually received what the fruit provided, the humans were now in a particularly vulnerable state. If they ate from the tree of life, they would now live forever in this state of delusion. Hence, the divine judgment of banishment, of banishing them from the garden, was actually a sign of mercy on the humans and not an example of retributive judgment. But now the humans no longer had access to the tree of life and they became subject to their mortality. Hence, in Genesis chapter 5, we repeatedly read about people who live. So and so lived, he had a son, after he lived so many years, then after he had a son, he lived this many years, and then he died. The same pattern is there in Genesis 5. Hammering home the fact that now humans are subject to death. When we come to Genesis 6, the divine judgment is that of unleashing the flood. Since, according to this account, the flood covers the whole world, theologically speaking, this is a universal judgment against the evil that God had identified. Hence, the flood is intended to put an end to the human inclination towards violence, and especially in the context of Genesis 4 and 6, violence against women also. The 8 occupants of this ark were supposed to form a new humanity with the knowledge that God had found human violence and exploitation worthy of judgment. Hence, following the flood, now God makes the only covenant that includes every part of creation along with the humans. So this Genesis chapter 9, that's the only covenant made with all of creation. Yeah? With a covenant made not just with humans but with every other life form on the earth, the intention is to tell humans that they cannot exploit and violate other parts of creation, let alone other humans. However, it is in the next chapter itself we read about Nimrod, who I referred to earlier, who is celebrated for his violence. It is under his command that the ancient cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Resen are built. Of course, Babylon and Nineveh will play an enormous role in the history of the Israelites, being the capitals of the 2 empires under which the Israelites are dispersed into exile. Hence, Nimrod, as the founder of these cities, serves to show that human violence had not been dealt with. It was still being celebrated. If the flood judgment is explicitly against human violence and exploitation, the judgment in Genesis 11 is against the fruit of human violence and exploitation. The scattering of the humans with the subsequent rise of languages is intended to be so that there would not be one language to unite all humans and take them down the path of destruction. So now maybe people who are speaking language A get deceived and they'll go, but people who are speaking language B and C, etc., are prevented because they can't understand each other. Yeah? So again, it's a sign of mercy. We always take it as retributive, but this is God's mercy. If one group damages themselves because of the difficulty in communication, the other groups are still protected. Further, the confusion caused at Babylon forces the humans to spread through the earth, thereby undermining their centralizing efforts. The possibility of different voices now, literally through the variety of languages, is supposed to protect against the human inclination towards totalitarian thinking. Of course, we need now only look around us to realize that humans continue to have totalitarian tendencies. Yeah? Governments all over the place don't like any dissenting voices. Yeah? Okay? And this then leads to all sources of conflict. The first source of conflict comes in the form of the answers to worldview questions. Worldview questions are not necessarily explicit questions that we ask ourselves. There are different sets of questions that various scholars have suggested as worldview questions. For our purposes, I'd like us to consider just these following questions. Who are humans? Where do humans come from? What is the problem? What is the solution? So, those are worldview questions. Yeah? We don't normally go around asking ourselves those day by day, but there's some answers that we already have that dictates how we live. Yeah? The answers to these questions are crucially important, and they shape our identity and our purpose. Due to this, different answers to the questions inevitably give rise to conflict because these answers reach to the depths of our being. Any different answer calls into question our answers and therefore our understanding of the world we live in. Now, the four worldview questions asked for they're concerning identity, who are humans, origin, where do humans come from, difficulty, what is the problem, and conclusion, what is the solution. So we know that life in this world is not easy. So we know that there is a difficulty. And all of us have some kind of idea of what would make a better place, right? So there's a solution. Yeah? So as we move forward, we will address these questions. However, we will focus mostly on the solution. If there is a solution, it is obvious, because the solution is not evident right now, that not all humans possess the knowledge of the solution. Because if all of us had the knowledge of one solution, it would be solved. Yeah? But so maybe there's only a tiny group of humans. The solution then will reside in the hand of a select few, a chosen people, if you will, who have been given insight about the true nature of identity, origins, difficulty, and conclusion, and who therefore bear the responsibility for the future. So let us see how different answers to these questions can give rise to conflicts. For example, to the answer to the question, who are humans? We could answer, as per the ancient Near Eastern myths, this world and the humans are byproducts of a battle between the gods. This would then indicate that violence is foundational to us, because that is the context within which we are created. So then conflict is something we should expect and accept. Right? It would also indicate that creation is nothing but the ruins left over after this cosmic battle ended. So that would affect the way we view creation itself. Or we could say that this creation, we are the creation of a God who only had to speak things into existence, and who entrusted us with the task of spreading his reign over all the earth. In other words, the biblical story asserts that violence is not something inherent to us, and that care for this creation is intrinsic to our vocation as God's image bearers. So we can see that we have two different visions here of human origins and vocation that would give rise to conflict, because there's no way both can be true. You can't have us being the product of a violent battle and of us not being a product of a violent battle. Not possible. You can't have creation being a byproduct of a battle, whatever is left over, and something special that God entrusts humans to take care of, contrary to worldviews. So this then the difference raises another important question. Who are the chosen people to whom this knowledge has been given? You see, if there are different visions that cannot coexist, this automatically means that the claims of one group, our group, we have the correct answers, and the other groups, their groups, do not. When the answers can't fit, and we have one answer and someone else has another answer, we believe we are right. So automatically the other person is wrong, right? So this leads to the next source of conflict, identifying these chosen people. You see, if only certain people, our group, has the correct answers, how do we recognize who belongs to our group? This is where ritual and practices come into play. A Muslim may pray 5 times a day and fast during Ramzan. That's what you would expect a Muslim to do. A Hindu may fast on Tuesdays and perform arti in a prayer room at home. Those are common practices for Hindus. Those are the kind of practices that define people. And while we use the same words, prayer, fasting, they have a different significance within each worldview. Christian prayer is different from Muslim prayer and is different from Hindu prayer. And when we fast, it's a different kind of fast. When we say we're fasting, it's probably, one whole day we don't do anything, maybe we drink water. For the Muslims, between sunrise and sunset, and then afterwards they are able to eat, right? For a Hindu, fast means a different diet. They eat during the whole of the day. It's just that it's different food that they eat, and that's a fast. Completely different ideas of what fasting means. So once again, we have a source of conflict in the practices and rituals that define us. We even have a problem arising from determining where you can locate such people who belong to our group. Now, according to some quite misled people in India, according to them, people who are dear to Abrahamic faiths do not belong in India. You know who I'm talking about. But anyway, on what grounds do they say this? Yeah? If such reasoning is true, then we might as well say, if your favorite food is Mexican, you don't belong in India. If your favorite favorite sport is football, you don't belong in India, because those don't originate here. Right? That's the origin fallacy, which incidentally none of these Indians would ever use if you brought up the presence of the Angkor Wat, a Hindu temple dedicated to Vishnu in Cambodia, or the Vishnu temple in Bandar Abbas in supposedly extreme Islamist Iran. The existence of those temples there, they're not going to call into question. They would celebrate that there's a Hindu temple in Cambodia, many Hindu temples in Cambodia, and a big temple in Iran. In addition to this, another source of conflict is the sacred periods. When are these rituals supposed to be performed is a crucial question. Muslims have their calendar of festivals based on a strict lunar calendar. That's why their festivals keep moving every year. Hindus use an adjusted lunar calendar. So it moves and then it goes back and moves and then goes back, that sort of thing. Christians also use a combined lunar and solar calendar, which is why Christmas is fixed, whereas Easter and Good Friday do all sorts of things. Yeah? That's what we do, right? It's solar for Christmas, but it's a combination of lunar and solar for Easter and Good Friday. Muslims have their festivals at various points in the calendar, similarly the Hindus. While in India, now we get a holiday for pretty much every festival, right? If you're working, you're not a Muslim, but still you get a holiday for Eid. You're not a Hindu, you get a holiday for, Pongal and all, whatever, yeah? So, what would we do if we were in a country where Christmas, Good Friday, and Easter are not holidays? It would likely give rise to some resentment in us, especially if we are used to being in India. Everyone gets a holiday. Even the Hindus get a holiday for Good Friday. So what's going to happen? Of course, if we've identified a chosen people, we need to ask ourselves the purpose for which they have been chosen. According to Hindu doctrine, the world is cycling through various ages, and we are expected to side with the good in each age. According to Muslim doctrine, the world is moving to a culmination where the whole world will be Islamic. According to Christian doctrine, we are expected to be God's agents in this world, and we await the return of Jesus, and He will set everything right. These are three different visions of a chosen people, and they do not fit well together. Of course, the worldview has to indicate the final goal towards which we are moving. Hinduism, with its cyclical view of history, has no final goal, apart from an individual soul liberating itself from this cycle of samsara and achieving moksha. That's it. But the world continues through its cycles. You may be liberated from that. According to Islam, the righteous will be allowed to enter paradise, while the unrighteous will be punished. In the Christian scheme of things, we await a new creation when God will set everything right, restore everything that was wrong with His current broken but good creation. Again, these ideas don't fit well together. We can, of course, approach the issues of conflict from what we read in the Bible. The three lenses, Genesis 3, 6, and 11, actually tell us from a theological perspective a lot about why humans are almost always poised for an outbreak of violence against each other. Regarding the question, who are humans, the three lenses tell us we are people who grab things for ourselves, even if it means alienating someone else, even if it means by violence, even if it means we exploit them, but those who have no name and are desperately trying to make a name for themselves. That's who we are. With regard to the issue of practices that characterize humans, we have already devoted some time into the pattern of seeing an object, evaluating it as good, and then taking it for ourselves. Even Cain's act of building a city can be seen in this light. When an ancient city was built, it involved marking off some land as inside the city and building a fortified wall, thereby saying everyone else was outside. Right away, distinguishing between those who are inside. It makes the inside of the city the possession of a small group of people, when in fact the whole earth is given to all of humankind. The complete blindness of humans comes across when we ask ourselves questions about place. Where do we find humans? In Genesis 3, they are driven east of the garden. Then from Cain onwards to the people in Genesis 11, we see a continuous move eastward. Cain moves further east, and then they're moving east till they reach Shinar. That's the trend. This continuous movement increases the distance of banishment. So, from your perspective, this is east, right? Yes. Yeah. So that if this is Eden, they're driven east, and they keep moving east. No one is thinking, let's go back west where we came from. They're all going east, increasing the distance of the banishment from God. And finally, they reach the plains of Shinar. If we ask ourselves the purpose of humans, each of these three lenses gives us related but slightly different answers. In Genesis 3, we see humans see their purpose as being to possess wisdom. We want this knowledge of good and evil. This is what we want. In Genesis 6, it becomes gaining reputation as warriors, having superior status through the designation sons of God. And in Genesis 11, it is to prevent scattering and make a name for themselves. Not identical, but quite related. However, there is no plan, because everything is based on immediate gratification. Hence, all the perceived purposes of humans serve no higher goals than immediately getting what they want. The pursuit of these purposes becomes an end in and of themselves. However we frame these questions and however we answer them, there is a logic that automatically gives rise to conflict. We have seen that the different answers given to these worldview questions and the answers given by the scriptural lenses do not fit well together, either in relation to each other, as seen in the competing answers from different religions, or by ourselves, as seen in the answers from the scriptural lenses. Humans are gripped by an either-or mentality that gives rise to the following logical reasoning. First, there is a recognition that these answers given cannot sit well alongside each other. So you know that the Hindu answers, the Muslim answers, the Christian answers, they don't gel. You know that in our bones. Yeah? Every practicing Hindu and practicing Muslim will also tell you that. It is only those who are superficial with their faith who say all religions teach the same thing. Yeah? Those who know anything about these faiths will say, absolutely not, they don't teach the same things. There may be certain things that they value. We all value peace. That is probably a universal human thing rather than anything related to religion. Yeah? But anyway. Second, there is a conclusion, therefore. If your answers to the questions are right, my answers are wrong. Because they don't fit together, right? So if your answers are right, mine are wrong. This leads to the third step. If I'm wrong, I have misunderstood everything. I've misunderstood who I am. I've misunderstood what I'm supposed to be doing. I misunderstood where my goal is. Everything I've misunderstood because you're right, right? Therefore I'm wrong. Yeah? This, of course, leads us to the fourth stage. Then either I am deceived because I'm weak-willed, don't have a very good intellect, or whatever it is, or I'm deficient. Yeah? So I'm either weak-willed or I'm intellectually deficient. That's why I've been deceived. Right? So now we've reached that logic that states that if I'm wrong, I'm either an easily deceived person or I have a poor intellect. This leads us to the fifth step. I cannot stand this idea. I'm not deceived. I'm not deficient. I can't stand that idea because that reflects on the kind of person I am, right? And since I can't admit that I am wrong, I conclude I'm not wrong. Then the only conclusion is, since both of us cannot be right, you must be wrong. And then this leads to the final stage. You then are either deceived or deficient, or maybe you are deceptive yourself. So you're an active deceiver, not just someone who's being deceived. You're actively deceiving. So what we reach now is a place where, because I cannot stand being wrong, I assume everyone who disagrees with me is somehow deficient as a human. Hence, from a recognition of that some sets of answers are incompatible, we conclude that the other person must be defective in some way. That automatically, if they are defective, you've got to set them right, right? That's what we are about. We know that there's a problem. We know that we are called to set things right. So I will set things right. Now we have to see how we can set things right, right? And so and that gives rise to conflict. But conflict does not always appear in plain sight. Hence, it is important that we need to learn to recognize some symptoms of conflict. So here I would like to mention a few symptoms without explaining them in great detail. First, the intolerance of difference is seen in that one language, one word of Genesis 11. Second, what is now commonly called cancel culture. If you've heard of it, if you've been on social media, you probably have, which is the use of power to silence anyone who has an opposing view. They have a view that you don't agree with, and you somehow silence them, cancel them out. Third, as seen in the term sons of God and daughters of men, we use terminology to elevate or put down different people. When we use labels as arguments, we are guilty of doing this. And we Christians very often use labels. We use our denominational labels very often. Oh, they are this, they're Baptists, or they're Pentecostals, or they're Methodists. I mean, those are labels we use. Yeah? But when we are using that to dismiss what someone says, we are doing precisely this. We are not addressing their arguments, actually, right? Because we are just saying, oh, they are this kind of people, so they don't need to be heard. Yeah. Fourth, the spread of paranoia and fear. In Genesis 11, the people say they want to build a city lest we be scattered. When you see people trying to motivate you based on fear and paranoia, you know that there is some conflict they don't want you to deal with. And so they are scaring you so that you don't attempt to look carefully and identify what the conflict is, what the sources are, what might be the solutions. If anyone is trying to frighten you about anything, there is some conflict there that they don't want you to see. Fifth, the formation of echo chambers, as seen in Genesis 11, with only one message being permitted expression. So if you find yourself in groups where everyone's agreeing with each other, something is wrong. We humans are not designed to have exactly the same ideas about everything. If we don't disagree, there is something wrong. Something has gone wrong with the whole dynamic. We are supposed to be unified, yes, but you can say something is unified only if there are different elements, right? If you work a jigsaw puzzle, all the puzzle pieces are different, but they make one picture at the end, right? If you have all pieces nice, neat squares, it's not a jigsaw puzzle then. Right? In fact, then you can put it in any order and it will make no sense. It's only when you have different unique pieces that fit together that you can make a good picture at the end. Yeah. Sixth, the development of an us versus them mentality, as in Genesis 6, where it resulted in the breakdown of the relationship between the woman and the man, right? What have you done? The woman you gave me, not she who I called in the previous chapter bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. The woman you gave me. So blame God, blame the woman. That's it. I'm off. Right? So that itself breaks down the relation. Seventh, the move towards apathy and disengagement, as in Genesis 11, where there is no attempt to try to understand each other. Yeah, just as soon as they recognize that they're not able to communicate, that's it. There's no attempt. And if you look at Genesis 11, they were all speaking one language, and God confuses their language. Not God doesn't confuse their languages. It's singular. God confuses their language. So they're speaking the same language still and not understanding each other. So they're not even making an attempt to try to understand the other person, because automatically it's like, if you disagree with me, that's it. Eighth, the development of a lack of trust, as in Genesis chapter 3, with the refusal to accept responsibility and then the passing of blame. Yeah? Ninth, the use of dehumanizing language about those who disagree with us. So we use those kind of people. Oh, they are like this. They do this kind of thing, or whatever. If we ever find ourselves using language that does not portray people as full humans, something's wrong. And then 10th, allocation of different status to different groups of people. So some people are sons of God, whereas others are just daughters of men. Whatever. That's in Genesis 6, but you can get an idea, right? So and so is whatever they've done. You know, something that they've done or something that they are, and you elevate them, and everyone else is at the bottom. Yeah? So different status to different people. So what might the solutions to this conflict be? What would they look like? We are not presenting any possible solutions today. We must still ensure two things are kept in mind when we propose solutions. First, solutions must address the underlying differences in the answers that people have to the worldview questions. If we don't address them, you're just going to deal with everything at the superficial level. Because if you don't get people to change who they understand, their understanding of who they are, how they came here, what the problem is and where they're going, you're not changing anything. Yeah? Not understanding someone else's worldview is a surefire way to ensure that the conflict is never resolved, and that there may be a temporary truce, but after a few months, few years, whatever, it'll erupt again. And we can see that happening in our country over and over and over again. Second, some worldviews, such as extreme capitalism or any racial supremacist views, are inherently not conducive to solutions, because automatically they thrive on the capitalism, extreme capitalism, thrives on a deprivation mentality. I must ensure that I have, and that can only happen when you don't have. And others, racially supremacists, my race, my people are obviously the best, all of the others are obviously less. You can't have any, that has to change. Yeah? So those worldviews have to be challenged and dismantled. They cannot be catered to. So just because someone has a worldview doesn't mean you have to, try to work with that. No, some worldviews are just demonic. They need to be destroyed. Yeah? So in proposing solutions, I don't mean we accept everything as the same. Yeah? Some need to be destroyed. Yeah?